Hi everybody. I'm Brian Gresko. Welcome to the Antibody, a quarantine reading series, part of Literary Hub's virtual book channel. I'm coming to you from my studio in Brooklyn, where it's very humid. It seems like every 3 weeks or so since quarantine began in March, the tone and the volume of New York City has changed, and it's happened again. There were ambulance sirens at first, and then police sirens, and then fireworks, and now, like, fingers crossed, the past few nights have been still and quiet. So hopefully that'll continue. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that the protests for racial equality, though they are no longer marching down my block, I'm grateful that they continue throughout the city and the country. And I'm really grateful to be with you now to welcome three wonderful authors to our screens. Afiya Atakura is here. Clare Beams is here, and Kirkland Hamill is here, and you are here. And I hope you've got something delicious to drink or to nibble on. And I hope that you will join me in just taking a deep breath and just settling yourself back to appreciate the author's artistry. Your mics are on mute right now. I ask you please keep them that way. We don't have a stage, but we have a microphone, and we're going to honor the authors when they have it, as each author is going to read to us for a little bit. And at the end of the event, there will be time for a Q&A, which we can do through the chat or through the mic, but just be ready for that. But between now and then, the chat here is open so that you can show your appreciation of the authors, and please do often and enthusiastically give them some shout outs. And so yeah, let's get started. So please, get your keys clicking and your fingers tapping to welcome our first author, Afiya Atakura. Afiya Atakura was born in the United Kingdom and raised in New Jersey, where she now lives. She graduated from New York University and has an MFA from Columbia University, where she was the recipient of the D'Alba Fellowship. Her fiction has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and she was a finalist for the Hurston Wright Award for College Writers. And she is also the author of a novel, her first novel, Conjure Women. So please give a warm welcome to Afiya Atakura. Hi, Afia.
Hello, Brian. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for viewing. So let's see a little bit about Conjured Women, just to give you a quick introduction. It is a story that is set in an isolated town of recently freed slaves. And it centers on the character of Rue, who is a conjure woman, a midwife, and a healer in the town. And she comes from a family with a legacy of healing. Her mother was also a healer, and the story sort of weaves back and forth from the years just after the Civil War and just prior, to tell the story of this legacy of healing and conjuring curses, and also to tell the story of Rue's relationship with slavery and with the daughter of the slave master on the plantation that she used to live in. And in the present, there is the sudden birth of a strange baby with black eyes, a mysterious illness that is sweeping its way through the town, and a mysterious preacher who arrives just in time to incite fears of witchcraft against Rue. So it's a very big, complicated, time-traveling novel. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of it here. I like to think of this as the hand washing section, which feels fitting for the pandemic. And it's going to sound like there are spoilers, but there aren't, I promise. And yeah, I think that's everything you need to know. So we will begin with slavery time. And just a little bit, actually, just a overview of what this section is about. Rue is sort of reflecting on her childhood and the things that her mother taught her in terms of becoming a midwife. All right, slavery time. The water ain't worth more than the bucket. If it were a song, her mama would have sung it as gospel till her throat ran hoarse. And after her mama was dead and gone, Rue had a habit of saying it to herself below her breath as a kind of prayer. Miss Maybelle had spoken many things before she passed on, and most of them Rue had let the years take away, had let erode on purpose. But there's some she held on to fast and kept whole. Scrub, Rue's mama had said, so that the whole of Rue's first memory of Miss Maybelle was the smell of lye soap and the sensation of her skin prickling as the water dripped down her elbows. You clean? Her mama would always ask. Yes'm. What you do next? Don't touch nothing. That's right. Don't touch nothing. For sure, it seemed always to be in the middle of the night, what her mama called the witch's hour, that they'd find themselves yanked from floating dreams and the freedom of sleep to stumble half blind to some woman's bedside, with her particular howling filling up the whole of the plantation, and Rue herself half asleep and waiting with her little sleeves rolled up her little arms and her arms held out in front of her wet, the drying and her jaw clenching with the urge to catch a yawn in her palm, but with the instructions, don't touch nothing, steadily knocking around in her head as good as law, because if she touched something, the baby might die. Thank the Lord you come just in time, Miss Maybelle, the man might say when they'd first arrive. His face would be twitching restless with the desire to look brave. It seemed to Rue that the men were always trying to look brave when really what they wanted was to leave Miss Maybelle to it. Rue's mama kept her dark face hard and neutral, for she believed excitement or fear, love or loathing could spread through the touch with the ease of pestilence, and the last thing you wanted was an excited mama too near her time. Miss Maybelle was known to look bored, as if the making of life, the creation of a whole person, was simple and ordinary, and to her it was. Brought my own baby out on my lonesome, she liked to tell folks. Miss Maybelle was something else. A soul come again, people said, born and born with the knowledge of some other place. And if Miss Maybelle insisted on a thing, she'd have it, as good as willing it into existence. She found fire to warm up babies born too soon, and old sheets to keep down the dust from the floor, and soap in frothing handfuls. And because she kept their property from dying, white folks let her have it. They let her have her own way, and the other Black folks looked on in just as much awe as envy at how she lived like a white woman amongst them. She'd show up moments before miracle, wash up, flick her wet hands, first the left, then the right, always the left, then the right. And the excess water would arc off her and sparkle by the light of the candle that she alone was allowed to have. And that meant it was time to settle in. Oh, we got a while yet, she'd say, and she'd shoo the man off with the reasoning that men were bad luck around birthing. Truth was, they just ran her nerves. Now, who you think helped Eve push out Cain and Abel? Miss Maybelle was heard to say loud and often. Surely wasn't no Adam. And folks got to saying that Miss Maybelle hated men, though that was not true. I wouldn't have no work if there weren't men to keep women bothered. Because by and by, she did let herself get bothered by a man, and that man was Rue's daddy. Rue couldn't know if what all she knew of her daddy was from real knowing or if it was from hearing the same story over and over till the story became as good or better than remembering. What she did know was this, what the network of his raised scars looked like on the bare skin of his back, the puckered flesh ridged in ruined pink, and how the pattern of long, thick lines had always made her think of the pattern in the palm of a hand, how the line that was the longest wormed its way from the bowl of his neck and traveled around to his back and down his spine. The ugliness of it never scared her before she understood that they were the lines from a long history of whippings, and how that was what she could make out most in the moonlight on those moonlit nights when he'd crawl up the bed on hands and knees like some pleading nighttime creature to bother Rue's mama. I didn't have any wanting for him at the first, Miss Maybelle would say, but on Rue's memory, her mama always seemed to want him as if she was a woman halved without him, would wait and wait for Sundays when visiting was allowed, with the kind of shrugged off longing kept by someone who near believed Sunday wouldn't be coming that week. And to those Sunday nights, Miss Maybelle showed her wanting. Rue would wake to her little breath-catching sounds like the reverse of weeping. Rue's daddy crouched down over Rue's mama, and on the fullest of those full moon nights, Rue could see the arc of him against her, as if she were floating up off the bed into his body, and Rue could see the tense fist of his left hand bearing all his weight against the mattress, and the softness of his right hand as it went off by itself and burrowed in the cotton of Rue's mama's hair. or drifted down her cheek to rest a thumb in the dimple of her lip, or disappeared completely downward to fill up the little space left between them. And Rue could see the muscles shifting beneath the damaged skin of his back like clouds stirring in the night sky until she lost herself in sleep again. When Rue's daddy died, Rue's mama died, though his death was grim and sudden, a surprise, and hers was a slow consumption by way of vengeance, spread out one long year after her man's death, easy as decay. Thank you.
Oh,
Wow, thank you, Afia. Thank you, everyone. Please show Afia some love there in the chat. Yeah, I'm gonna put a link here to that was so good.
Thank you.
To purchase a copy of Afiya Atakora's debut novel, Conjure Women, you can follow that link there. That's to bookshop.org, which will help connect you to a local bookseller or help provide you the book direct and route some of your money to a local bookseller. So support our authors and support our local and independently run bookstores while you're at it. Yeah, thank you again, Afia. That was beautiful. The thought too, especially the who helped Eve birth Cain and Abel, was like one of those lines where I was just like,
Thank you.
that was great. So great. I'm so excited to read more. Yeah, thank you again. Cool. All right. Moving on to our next reader, Kirkland Hamill. Kirkland has written for Salon and The Advocate and was formerly the Chief Development and Marketing Officer at the National Center for Family Philanthropy. He lives in Baltimore, Maryland with his husband, Dave, and a dog named Blue. And Filthy Beast is his first book. Please welcome Kirkland Hamill. Hi, Kirkland.
hey, there we are.
The mic is yours.
Oh, wow. Big face. Okay, there we go. Thank you so much for having me. Afia, that was amazing. Beautiful. I mean, just the words, just so beautifully, just sinking into your whole story through just amazingly beautiful writing. So my book is a memoir. It's mostly about my relationship with my mother. Filthy Beasts is the term of endearment, I guess is the way to say it, that she gave to me and my two brothers. Some people have described it a little bit as a riches to rags story. We grew up in pretty rarefied circumstances, and that all went to hell when my parents got divorced. And so the story sort of, I'm going to be starting from the beginning, from chapter 1. So I don't have to give you too much context for what I'm going to read, but it really is about how, my mother changed over the years as a result of her circumstances not being what they used to be, and how that affected me and my two brothers as we went along. So this is Filthy Beasts. I remember them laughing. I was a 4-year-old boy dressed in a pink halter top and miniskirt with pearls and heels, a cardboard gay liberation sign hanging around my neck. I wasn't sure what to make of the laughter. I was making people happy, but it seemed like their sharp cackles betrayed something other than joy. It was the first time that I'd been the subject of adult laughter, and there was something sinister about it. The laughter spiked when I wiggled my hips as instructed, making it difficult to stay balanced on my mother's 2-inch heels. My 7-year-old brother, Robin, wearing a dark suit, his hair combed down like a Wall Street banker's, walked beside me. My mother laughed the loudest. It was the annual Labor Day skit at our Adirondack Hunting and Fishing Club. More than 100 people lined to both sides of the enormous main room of the clubhouse to watch individual family camps perform cute skits using props like deer antlers and fishing rods. Puns like "there's something fishy going on," or "that was unbearable," accompanied lighthearted stories acted out by loving parents who swam after their kids in fake trout fins or chased them draped in grisly pelts. Earlier at our family's camp, my mother had kneeled down to dress me, giggling like a naughty schoolgirl. My father rifled through his closet, trying to find a necktie that would fit my older brother. "But I don't want to," I kept saying. "Oh, hush," my mother said. "It will be fun." I was bouncing up and down and twisting my body back and forth. "Hold still, Kirkland," she said, her giggles elevating. "You're going to lose your, oh my God, you're going to lose your top. Bobby, you've got to come in here." "There's my pretty little boy," my father said as he walked into the bathroom. "I'm not pretty," I yelled. "You look like a hooker," my father told me proudly. "His boob's sticking out," my mother cried. "It's not funny," I said, stamping my foot, yet at the same time cracking a tentative smile. I didn't know what gay liberation meant, but on some level I knew that I had been chosen over Robin to be the girl. It felt like a warning and a little bit of a punishment, and I sensed the injustice of being made a prop for my mother's amusement, but I delighted in how happy it made her. My mother was beautiful. Most people are understandably dubious of this claim, probably assuming that as a son, I see her how I want to see her. But she was beautiful, indisputably. People compared her to Grace Kelly and Candice Bergen, but it was the comparisons to Jackie Kennedy Onassis that she liked the best. Even as her son, I was as in awe of her as the rest of the world seemed to be. I appreciated how the expression of her beauty changed with her moods, how her bright green eyes sparkled innocently when she was telling a funny story, or held somebody's gaze as she listened to them. She had fair skin and naturally blonde, shoulder-length hair that fell in wisps in front of her eyes, or from behind her ears in endless variations. Her smile was lit from a source deep inside of her, candid and genuine, so it was easy for me to tell when she was faking one. Her high cheekbones didn't lift. The smile looked more like a scowl, but it was the eyes that gave her away. I always knew how my mother felt by looking into her eyes. My father was not lit from the inside. He would have been considered cosmetically good-looking, with dark, curly hair and dimpled cheeks. He had the kind of aristocratic frame that was both athletic and sexless, like many men of his ilk. A blank canvas onto which was painted Nantucket red pants, Gucci loafers, and nondescript button-down short-sleeve shirts. His side of the family was pure, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, Mayflower descendant, white butler rich. The butler's name was Eugene, and in my memory he wore a tuxedo all day long, but it might have just been a suit. We had many portraits of bygone relatives hanging throughout our house. One of my great-grandfather, looking like Teddy Roosevelt, reading studiously with pince-nez hanging off his nose, and a second great-grandfather in a suit standing upright with a cane, both men humorless and commanding. Perhaps the painting of my grandfather, showing him looking relaxed behind the helm of one of his 3 yachts, is telling of the family fortune that would be lost under his watch. My parents and one of his many girlfriends were usually the only guests included on my grandfather's yachting trips up the Maine coast every summer. He left my grandmother at home. We lived in Cedarhurst, a quiet Long Island suburb on a dead-end street lined with enormous maple and oak trees that created a protective canopy over the neighborhood. 3 homes made up our family compound. The 3-story, 4,000 square foot house we lived in had been a wedding present from my father's parents. On one side of us was my great Aunt Peg's house, a 13,000 square foot mansion called Lauderdale that my great-grandfather Henry Hobart Porter had built in the late 1800s. On the other side lived Peg's son, Seton, named after another ancestor, Mother Seton, and his family. I asked my aunt once if my grandmother's middle name, Delano, indicated any relation to FDR. She scowled and said, "Grandfather never liked to talk about that cousin. He was a Democrat." On the weekends, my grandfather would host us for dinner at the Long Island Rockaway Hunting Club that was just down the street from our house, where we would order steaks, Pittsburgh rare, meaning seared on both sides and raw in the middle, with insider names like Delmonico and Porterhouse. The adults would greet the club staff as if they were family. The club had a gaming room with multiple backgammon boards. You only played for money. Surrounded by framed photos of the past club presidents, my grandfather and great-grandfather included. There were men's only bars that smelled of cigars and scotch. The club logo was a fox surrounded by guns and golf clubs assembled together to look like the crest of some English earl's estate. The fox hunting part of the club had ceased long before I was born, but the name remained, ensuring that people knew we were the type of people who would dress in red, mount thoroughbred horses, and follow screeching hounds chasing a fox to its death if we still could. Breakfast at the club had only 2 items, runny eggs and crisp bacon. Being rich back then meant that you could have anything you wanted, but you limited choices to ensure that the new rich people who wanted omelet stations and bottomless mimosas would never even try to join. Whenever we drove to the clubhouse, we passed the rows and rows of grass tennis courts. Occasionally, there would be 2 women who looked to be the same age as my mother, playing on the court closest to the clubhouse in their short white skirts and frilly underwear. By the time my parents married, my father's family had secured a seemingly permanent foothold in society's upper echelons. They owned Park Avenue apartments and second homes right outside the city. They drank a lot. They often didn't have jobs, and the ones they did have, they didn't need. They cheated on their wives with the wives of their closest friends. My father was the youngest of 4. The next oldest was 10 years his senior, and the only boy. His parents didn't think childcare had anything to do with them, so the nannies and kitchen staff looked after him until he went to boarding school when he was 7. He saw his parents on school vacations, if they happened to be in the country, and was expected to dress for breakfast in jacket and tie when they were in town. My grandfather went to Yale, served on the boards of Pan American Airways and the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and was the president of my great-grandfather's engineering company. My father wasn't a strong student, which is what one says about spoiled offspring who don't feel like they have to work at anything. He would not have been accepted to Yale even in the days when the progeny of graduates were almost guaranteed admission. So he was encouraged by his father to bypass higher education altogether. Not to worry, my grandfather told him. The only reason people go to college is to get a job, to make money, and you will never have to worry about money. Knowing my father as I do now, I imagine he was relieved to find that there is no expectation that he should live up to his father's success, and that he could instead skip straight to living the life that had already been earned for him. But first, he had to find the right partner. My mother was from a working-class family in Bermuda, born to a stay-at-home English mother and a Scottish father, who worked as a traveling hardware salesman. My mother rarely talked about her life before my father, but when she did, I was left with the impression that she was concealing an undisclosed wound, deep enough to want to escape into my father's far more complicated world. That's it.
Thank you so much, Kirkland. Oh, goodness. That was such a pleasure to follow along with. What a great and tantalizing place to stop. Can everyone please show a little love and appreciation for Kirkland there in the chat? That was really beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm putting a link up here to pre-order a copy because Kirkland, this comes out on next week.
A week
correct?
from today, yeah, the 14th, July 14th.
Awesome. So yes, and 1 week from today. So yes, so if you want to purchase a copy, pre-order a copy, I imagine if you pre-order it tonight, they will probably send it right to you. So, so please do. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirkland. Our final reader for the evening is Clare Beams. Clare Beams' new novel, The Illness Lesson, was named a New York Times Editor's Choice, a Best Book of 2020 by Esquire and Bustle, and a Best Book of February by Time, O Magazine, and Entertainment Weekly. Her story collection, We Show What We Have Learned, was published by Lookout Books in 2016. It won the Bard Fiction Prize, was long-listed for the Story Prize, and was a Kirkus Best Debut of 2016, as well as a finalist for the PEN Robert W. Bingham Prize, the New York Public Library's Young Lions Fiction Award, and the Shirley Jackson Award. Clare's fiction appears in One Story, N+1, Ecotone, and numerous other publications, and she lives in Pittsburgh with her husband and 2 daughters, which is where she's joining us tonight. Please give a warm welcome to Clare Beams. Hi, Clare.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Brian, for having me. And thank you to the other readers. Those are both, I can't wait to read those books. I'm very pulled in by both of them already. So thank you. Okay, so my novel is The Illness Lesson, and I am going to read from about a third of the way into the book, so I do have to give you just a little bit of background for this to make any sense. So we are at a brand new school for girls in 1871 Massachusetts, and it has been founded by an aging philosopher named Samuel Hood, who has decided to sort of try for greatness one more time by proving to the world, starting a school to prove to the world that girls can do the same things that boys can do. And his 29-year-old daughter, Caroline, is our main character. And she is also sort of forced into teaching at this school, along with a man named David, who is her father's acolyte and to whom she is sort of finding herself increasingly drawn. So this passage comes from a part in the book when things with the plan have started to go awry in various ways. So Eliza, one of their new students, is proving very difficult. And David turns out to have a wife he failed to mention, who he has just brought to the school to teach art alongside the others, causing some trouble for Caroline. So his wife's name is Sophia, and this passage that I'm going to read is taken from her very first lesson, so her first day of teaching at the school. And the chapter that this is taken from is called Red Spot. Okay. Sophia introduced herself brightly, as if she had never met the girls before. She explained that they would begin their first class with portraiture. The girls looked a little bored. Eliza said, "My first drawing master told me all portraits are lovely lies." "Did he?" Sophia said, for what his opinion is worth. "He must have been a very gifted man, I'm sure, Miss Bell." "He made everything wooden somehow," Eliza said. Samuel watched over the tops of his spectacles, his face now less philosophical. He had worked so hard on this room and what it held. "I'm no good at portraits," said Meg. "Maybe we should draw fruit or something first." "Fruit isn't interesting," Sophia said, dismissing whole artistic schools. Samuel drummed a finger on his closed book as if hoping Sophia would look in his direction so he could signal to her to become a different person. David stared out the window in a way that Caroline considered cowardly. Sophia instructed the girls to pair up. Every eye darted to Eliza, who bestowed her hand upon Livia. The jilted others took their partners with disappointment. Caroline looked to Samuel. Was he seeing? But now he was looking at his hands. The feet of the chairs groaned against the wood floors as the girls bent themselves in half to drag them. David winced. "Be careful, please. I sanded these floors myself." "Of course you did," said Felicity slyly, the sort of meaningless, weighted thing the girls were always saying to David. Samuel cleared his throat. The sound seemed to fluster Sophia. She rustled through her papers. "If you're the one being drawn, just sit naturally," she told the girls. The subjects, of course, could not. They held themselves rigidly at carefully chosen angles, the way Caroline had seen them hold themselves before mirrors. Small, uncomfortable shiftings, as if the eyes of the one drawing prickled. Eliza was the only one who sat, subjected to Livia's pencil, much as she always did. She was used to the feel of eyes. Sophia circled the room. "Remember proportion." The ones drawing were beginning to prickle now, too. "You don't actually look like this, all right? Don't worry," Rebecca said to Meg. "I'm hopeless," said Livia. Felicity giggled. "You look a little like my uncle." "Your uncle?" "Not like him exactly. It's just he has this expression, this sort of pucker to his lips. I did that to your lips here, see?" "What is that?" Livia said in a different tone. She had put down her pencil and was stretching her hand across the desk toward Eliza's face. "There's a red spot in your eye, Eliza." "What? What sort of a red spot?" Samuel asked. "Come see." They closed in. Eliza's fingers hung in the air, wondering where to press. "Which eye?" she said. "What does it look like?" Livia's finger advanced. Instinctively, Caroline batted her hand away. "I was just showing," Livia said. Caroline could see it. The red dot began in the gray of Eliza's iris and stretched into the white. It was the size of a ladybug or a very small button, darker in the middle, fading to a haze at its edges. Does it hurt? Sophia asked. Who has a mirror? Eliza said. Julia, of course, produced one. Eliza held it before her face, widening her eyes at herself in the glass. Here was the posing that had been missing before as she tilted herself for the best view. She touched the outer corner of the afflicted eye, then stared at her fingertip as if she thought it might come away bloody. It looks like a little red sun, Rebecca said. No, Samuel said. No, it looks like what it is, a bit of a hurt place. You must have bumped your eye, Miss Bell, that's all. I didn't, I really didn't. Come, you can't possibly remember all the discomforts you feel in a given day, Samuel said briskly. And the eye is unusual territory. It has its own way of registering complaints, quite apart from the nerves. A simple broken blood vessel, probably, David said. Eliza's fingers tented over the skin just to the side of her eye, then flew away. I can't see, she said wildly. Her eyes fluttered. I can't. Miss Bell, of course you can. Let us remain ourselves. Though Caroline could hear the effort in Samuel's voice, she doubted any of the others could. You saw perfectly well until Miss Bunting pointed this little injury out, didn't you? A problem so feeble as that isn't a problem at all. And I can tell you can see, you're looking at me. Let us remain ourselves. Yes, let us. One constant in Caroline's life, how much better she could feel when her father was talking. Eliza's hands flapped. There's a place where I can't see, a hole, she gasped. Shouldn't we fetch the physician? She's saying there's something wrong, said Sophia. Wouldn't she know? There was a pause at this violation of the teacher's unspoken understanding never to contradict one another openly in front of their students. This public assertion that Eliza's damage required reckoning. Caroline had wanted to assert the same herself, but she resented that Sophia had done it, and done it in this way. Once a suggestion enters the mind, it can be difficult to know what we usually know, said Samuel, collecting himself, smoothing this particular circumstance into a feature of human nature. Caroline stepped forward and touched Eliza's hand. We'll keep watch on it. She'd almost said, keep an eye. We'll do next whatever is needed. Samuel clapped briskly, trying to force a different rhythm on the room. But for now, girls, portraiture awaits you. You want me to pretend this isn't happening? Cried Eliza. Very little has actually happened, but no, I only meant to suggest that there are questions at hand worthier of your talents and energies, Miss Bell. The question of proportion, as you rightly suggested, Mrs. Moore, among other artistic matters, I'm sure. Tell us, what else should the girls attend to? Sophia hesitated. Well, shading, she said, and line. The girls were sitting back down in their places. After a moment, even Eliza, the hollows beneath her eyes wet with tears. Shading and line, Samuel said. Quiet fell as they drew. Caroline watched Olivia's pencil, waiting to see it bore into Eliza's eye on the page. Her own eye watered. Thanks, I'll stop there.
Wow, thank you so much. That was creepy. In the good way. Please, everyone, show some love and some appreciation for Claire Beams. That's the illness lesson. I'm putting the link here to purchase a copy from bookshop.org, and I encourage you, please do. That that line too, the portraits are lovely lies. So good, so good. Thank you so much, Claire. It was really great. So everyone in the audience, you get an opportunity to ask a question if you've got one, but before you do, I'm actually gonna start off with a question, because I noticed all of you guys, I want to ask you about research, because from the two novelists, you're both writing, about historical time periods that are not today, and Kirkland, you're writing, a memoir and going back to old memories and old experiences. So I'd love to hear from each of you just a little bit, just like how does research play a part in your writing process? And I guess, especially as a teacher, a question that I often get from students is like, how do you know when to research and when to just write, not to use research as a kind of procrastination? Who'd like to start?
Well, I certainly do not have any wisdom about not procrastinating. But for mine, I love historical fiction. I love anything, set in a different time period and just learning about that sort of world, and that sort of world building. So for me, I sort of had an interest in this prior to starting the novel, particularly the Reconstruction era. So I had sort of a baseline level of knowledge, and I sort of went back and tried to read as many great books as I remember about the time period. And then once it came down to writing, I tried to be really strict about just sticking to sort of personal documents. So diaries, I read a lot of court records, a lot of like slave ship manifestos or farming records, anything that felt really sort of personal. And I found that kind of kept me close to the characters without feeling like I had to sort of say, and then in 1865, it let me sort of really feel their day-to-day lives. And so I think that's the most important thing for me, is just keeping close to the characters and remembering they don't know that they're in a time period.
Oh, I like how you put that, like they don't know they're in the time period. Just,
I love that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's such a great way of thinking about it, because like I always find, I also love historical fiction, but I really don't love a thing that some historical fiction does where all of a sudden you're like learning about the curtains for a paragraph, you know, because like the people in the room don't care about the curtains. To them, it's just the curtains, you know? So I think for me, I also feel like I wish I had words of wisdom to offer about this. I mean, I feel like I was constantly wondering if I should be researching when I was writing, and wondering if I should be writing when I was researching. But I wrote all of this book as either a pregnant person or a young parent. And so I was sort of living in mortal terror of losing momentum. And so I tried really hard to always be writing and sort of filling in things as I ran into the need for them, just so that I didn't lose like 10 years of time just reading, you know, because I love reading and I don't always love writing. And so I was a little worried that I would just stay in the reading space for too long. So I tried to be sort of rigorous about what holes I was letting myself fill in. I also am the kind of writer where this is historical fiction, but there's also like a species of bird I invented, and there's some sort of mystical, surreal stuff that happens too. So I felt like that gave me some leeway. I didn't want to get things wrong, but I also was not exactly writing a real version of 1871 either. So.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting, I mean, I love that kind of when there's that historical element, but there's also that kind of magic or magical realism that kind of comes in. And so, you know, you're not necessarily getting a straight up history. So you can, give the author some leeway. Kirkland, what about you? What about for like for a memoir? Was there photos or diaries, or what did you rely on?
I was not very good at research. What I relied mostly on was stories from family members. Probably the most research was the part that I read, because there was a lot of, you know, specifics about my grandparents, you know, obviously that I learned from other people. One funny story, I got an advanced copy, got to my second cousin, and I got an email from them saying, I noticed in your book that you spelled our grandmother or great grandmother's name, Catherine, with an E, and it's spelled with an A, Katharine, which I'm sure you know, and I'm sure you fixed or something to that effect. And I was like, I didn't know that, and I didn't fix it. So Catherine will be with an E in the Filthy Beasts book. So most of my research, you know, I've been telling these stories for so long. My brothers and I have been repeating them for a long time. Obviously, that first story, when I was 4 years old, it was just such a striking memory. I remember it so well. I remember the look on my mother's face. I remember that feeling, that just feeling of being exposed in front of all these people. And, you know, a lot of the stories in my book are, you know, those moments that just sort of sear themselves into your memory. But yeah, I didn't, other than the things that really impacted me, I wasn't telling anybody else's story but my own. So yeah, my research was just, you know, writing down and bringing to life those moments that really had the biggest impact on me, and of course, told the larger narrative arc from beginning to end.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the audience if you guys have any questions. Here we go from Anne. Kirkland, she wants to know, has it been difficult to be so open, raw, and exposed about your childhood, especially given you are still so close to so many that you grew up with?
I've gotten this question a few times, and I haven't known how to. The answer is no, and I'm not quite sure why. Because I've not answered it very well before. When people have asked me, I've thought about it more, and I think I got a lot of that from my mother. It seems kind of ironic, given what ultimately we learn about her in the book. Which I originally wrote it, thinking these are going to be funny little outrageous stories, and because my mother was a severe alcoholic and had a lot of problems as we were growing up, it can't just be like, oh, isn't this funny? I wanted to tell a deeper story about navigating through these difficult times, keeping your humor. So the being open part, I think I learned at some point that if I was going to make it through, being open was the way that I was going to do it. I've seen so many people who take their pain and are closed down about it, and feel the shame of whatever happened to them that wasn't their fault. And I really internalized, luckily, at a pretty early age, that I wasn't going to let shame define who I was, that my family was what it was, our story is what it is. There are no heroes, there are no villains, they're just very flawed human beings. And I just believe all of us are flawed, and some of us talk about it more and some of us don't. And I was just going to be one of those people, probably for my own sake more than anything else, one of those people who was just going to talk about it.
Examining.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to extend it to the fiction writers, I guess, maybe in a different way, since of course fiction provides you a shield, I guess, but has there ever been a time, Claire or Afia, like when you're writing a fictional scene that you feel is kind of getting too raw, you feel like you're kind of, I don't know, you start thinking, I guess, of that reader that's out there reacting to it? Or do you just follow your muse, for lack of a better term, and just figure the reader will follow along?
Do you want to? Well,
yeah, do it.
So I think there are definitely scenes and there are certainly scenes in this book, and I think in most things that I write, where I don't want to do that to the characters, and yet it's what has to happen. So there are scenes that are sort of not fun to write in that way, like things where something bad is happening and you sort of have to get through that moment with them, and you've usually kind of come to love them. And so that can be hard. I think I tried pretty deliberately not to think about the reader for a really long time, just because I've found, and I think it took me until well after grad school to learn this, but I found that when I think about readers and opinions of other people too early, I don't write anything that's very interesting. I write very carefully, sort of flattened, dead stuff where there's no mistakes are made, but nothing really happens either. So I try really hard for a very long time to pretend that nobody but me is ever going to see this, which is kind of true of any given scene you're writing. Nobody does ever have to see that particular thing if you don't want them to. You can always fix it, So I think I try to keep the reader out of it for a while.
That sounds smart, because I feel like it's easy to start second guessing yourself as soon as you imagine an outside eyes. Yeah. Afia, how about you?
Yeah. I feel like I have the same sort of thing. I agree. Keep the reader out of it. And then also I try to keep myself out of it. But then I think I realized, for example, that chapter that I read, my mother was a home health aide while I was growing up. And so I would sometimes go with her while she was taking care of patients. And I wrote this entire book, never thinking about that. And then my editor was like, oh, that's an interesting like thing that your character is so sort of fascinated with her mother being a midwife and observing. And I was like, oh yeah, that was my childhood. That did happen. I'm like, you sort of find yourself in the characters without even realizing it. And so that's a little bit like, oops. But yeah, I think things do sort of sneak in that feel sort of raw, and you kind of discover them in the writing, and that's sort of part of it. Yeah.
That's totally right. I almost never think that I'm writing about myself or anybody that
Exactly.
I know, but it's all you. I mean, it's all you and the people you know. It's just they aren't in there in any way that would necessarily be recognizable to anybody but you. You know.
That's really cool. Thank you. All right, we've got time for one more question. Is anyone? Oh, Alex, thank you so much, Alex. All right, last question here. Oh, and a great one. When do you decide to pursue a writing idea? How long do you let it simmer before putting it to the page? Who'd like to tackle that one first?
I'll talk about that. I remember the moment that when I wrote my first story. I just finished, and people have asked me about this before, and I've just finished David Sedaris's book Naked, and I thought, I can do that. I mean, I remember going to bed. I'd read the book, and I remember going to bed, and I couldn't get to sleep. And so the only way I was going to be able to get to sleep was if I got up and I started to write down all these stories that I've been telling my friends, and my brothers and I had been, sharing for a long time. I wanted to get it down, and a lot of that was because I sort of wanted a witness to what was happening. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy stuff. And, I just felt like and I think it was the beginning of me needing to make some narrative sense of all the things that had happened. And, David Sedaris and just his, brilliant way of taking something that is poignant and potentially painful and sort of skipping along the top of it and just making it sort of whimsical and funny and making you cringe and laugh at the same time. That's really what I wanted to do. And, nobody does it better than him, but I certainly was inspired by him to start writing down my first stories. So that was a catalyst for me.
That's really cool. I love that I feel like that's not uncommon, that sense of reading someone and thinking, I could do this, like maybe even better. Yeah, what about you guys, Claire, Afia?
And in terms of sort of when we know that something's worth pursuing, like a story idea, right? Like, I almost never know until I try it. Because I think that no story has ever proved to be as good as my original idea for it. I think the thing is in your head is always this like glimmering perfect thing. And then you start putting it on the page and you're like, like that part's hard, or like, I don't know how to make that happen, or I don't know how to like make that affect people the way I want it to. And I think for me, like it almost, I don't know if it's going to work and be worth getting to work until I've sort of started making something with it on the page. Is usually. So I guess that's not like a very useful answer, because I just feel like I have to sort of experiment with it and try it.
Can I, a quick follow-up? Do you have starts, things that you've started and then put aside? Because
I have whole novels in drawers. I have a novel that was an 8-year project that happily now I feel this way, but not at the time. I didn't feel happy about its drawer death. Yeah, I have things that, that's the thing, you don't always even know for like a lot of years whether something is really alive. The novel that had been my grad school thesis, I reworked and fixed and revised for years and years afterwards, thinking that it was going to be like my big important, debut book. And meanwhile, I was writing all these really weird short stories that were going in all these sort of strange directions. And the novel died and the stories became my first book. So you just never know.
That's so frustrating, but also hopeful at the same time.
Glad that the book is not in the world though now, because it just really is a pretty dead thing. Like it was very controlled and very, it just didn't do a lot ultimately. So.
Afia, what about you?
Yeah. I think usually I know it's time to write something down when I'm obsessed with it. So I'll start thinking, it's usually an image. It's usually sort of a starting image. And I'm like, all right, I have to figure this out. I have to put this, at least this scene down. And then that's when it sort of, it gains legs of its own, and it usually surprises me. And I think if it doesn't sort of go off and go a little crazy without me, then I know it's got, it's not the one to pursue, right? If it doesn't sort of like branch out on its own, then it's probably not going to branch out because of me. So it's usually those crazy ones that once they're sort of on the page have all this sort of possibility. I think that's the most exciting for me is getting that first line on the blank page and then feeling like, all right, I got to keep going. Yeah.
That's cool. That's very, and that sounds that's an exciting feeling to have. And also, that just feels like a great place to stop too. So thank you, Alex, and thank you, Anne, for your great questions. And thank you to our readers for this evening, Afia and Claire and Kirkland. Thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. And thank you to the audience. I mentioned this before, I'll be back a week from tonight on Tuesday, July 14th with Kelly Jo Ford. Her novel Crooked Hallelujah will actually be coming out on Tuesday. Purchisa Kakpour will be here reading from her new essay collection, Brown Album, and Raven Leilani will be here reading from her debut novel, Luster. I want to put the link in the chat there. If you'd like to register, please do. Please come back. And there's a full schedule. I'm running until early August if you want to see who's coming out for the rest of the month. Yeah, please come on back. Spread the word. A big thank you once again to tonight's readers and to the great audience for being here. Thanks to the Literary Hub. This will be archived on their virtual book channel. And yeah, to everyone out there, till next week, stay healthy, stay optimistic, and keep reading books. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, Anne and Wilbert. These are great questions. Thanks, Claire.